I picked out what I thought was the perfect Mother's Day present for my stepmom, and then quietly watched as the realization of what it truly meant hit her. I was just 12 when Richard married Vanessa. Exactly 1 year had passed since we lost Evelyn. Melanoma had taken her faster than anyone ever imagined. It started with what seemed like a simple headache, and in less than 3 months, I was standing in front of her grave, dressed in a new black dress with the price tag accidentally left on. 1 year to the day after she died, Richard introduced Vanessa to our home. She worked with him at his investment firm. She handled client relations. The type of woman who always had a perfect smile, flawless blonde hair, and wore stilettos to backyard barbecues. She makes me feel alive again, Richard told me softly but with conviction. I need you to try, Lauren. And so I did my best. I helped her move in, lugging box after box of designer shoes into the closet that once held Evelyn's gardening clothes. I stayed silent while she redecorated, swapping out our family memories on the walls for minimalist art she claimed made the space feel more open. I even managed a tight smile when she paved over Evelyn's vegetable garden to install a sleek meditation patio. Apparently, growing tomatoes was too quaint for her taste. For 3 long years, I played the role of the appreciative stepdaughter. I showed up at her corporate events in dresses she chose for me. I tolerated her friends who offered backhanded compliments like, "You're so mature for your age," while I forced polite smiles. I buried my grief in perfect report cards and rehearsed cheerfulness. Richard never seemed to notice I'd stopped laughing. He was too preoccupied with Vanessa's networking mixers and the new business she brought into the firm. Their weekends were packed with wine tastings and couples retreats. Meanwhile, I fell asleep each night with one of Evelyn's sweaters tucked under my pillow until her scent finally faded. Vanessa in her own way made attempts. She gave me extravagant birthday presents, things she clearly wanted for herself. She threw lavish dinner parties, proudly introducing me as our daughter to people who never remembered my name. She even set up a college fund for me and made sure to announce it to anyone who'd listen, as though generosity required a spotlight. But when I got my first period, it was Google that taught me what to do. When I woke up crying from dreams about Evelyn dying, the only comfort came from curling up with the family dog. The final straw came in my sophomore year. I'd landed the lead role in our school play, something that actually sparked excitement in me for the first time since Evelyn passed. But opening night happened to fall on the same date as Vanessa's big charity gala. "You'll need to skip your performance," she said, not even glancing up from her phone. "The Whitmans are bringing their son. He's at Princeton. This is about connections, Lauren." Richard opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but one look from Vanessa and he backed off. "It's just a high school play," he said eventually. "You'll have more chances." I went upstairs and pulled out the antique jewelry box Evelyn left me. Inside were her wedding ring, a tiny lock of my baby hair, and a journal I'd never dared open before. I'd been too afraid to face what she might have written in her final days. But that night, crying in the dark, I read every single page. Most of it was full of memories, advice she knew she wouldn't be able to share in person, and her hopes for my life. But the final entry, dated just 2 weeks before she passed, hit differently. "If you're reading this, Lauren, I need you to know about the safe deposit box," she wrote. "The key is taped to the inside cover. What you find there will change everything. I'm so sorry." The small silver key had the bank's name etched into it. The very next morning, I skipped class and went straight to First National. The bank manager recognized me immediately. "Your mom told us you'd show up one day," he said kindly as he walked me back to the vault. Inside the box, I found a USB stick, a stack of files, and a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Evelyn's elegant handwriting. "My sweet Lauren," it began. "By now, Vanessa's probably taken over every part of your lives. I've known about her for a long time." I read that letter twice, hands trembling. It turned out Evelyn had uncovered Richard's affair with Vanessa 6 months before her diagnosis. She had hired a private investigator to track everything. There were detailed reports, hotel stays, photos, text messages, even one image of them together while she was picking me up from soccer. The investigator had left nothing out. I stared at pages showing them arriving at hotels in different cities, read message exchanges that made my stomach twist. "She's taking Lauren to her mom's this weekend. Come over. Imagine when we don't have to sneak around anymore. Sometimes I wish she'd just disappear." That last one was from Richard, sent 4 months before Evelyn got sick. I flipped through the financial statements, stunned. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to on nights he claimed to be working late. Jewelry receipts for gifts Evelyn never received. A lease for a secret apartment that didn't appear in our family's records. But it went deeper. The documents exposed that Richard and Vanessa had been siphoning money from Evelyn's family trust funds meant for me into secret offshore accounts. This wasn't an impulsive affair. It had been methodically planned over years. Evelyn's side had built one of the city's largest investment firms over 3 generations. When Vanessa married Richard, he was just an ambitious advisor with big dreams and a lot to prove. She brought him into her world, took him under her wing, and helped him climb the ladder until he eventually made partner. The family trust wasn't just wealth, it was a legacy passed down through generations, and I was meant to be its future. What I uncovered were pages upon pages of financial records, painstaking spreadsheets tracing millions of dollars funneled through shell corporations, fake client portfolios, and rigged investment channels. The funds wound their way through a maze of countries before vanishing into numbered offshore accounts. Every single key document bore Richard's signature. Most of them had Vanessa's too. But the most gut-wrenching discovery wasn't about money, it was about Evelyn. Her medical records suggested her sudden health decline might not have been so unpredictable after all. There were test results that didn't add up, strange prescriptions with no clear purpose, and toxicology reports she'd arranged on her own after she began suspecting something. I started feeling strange after our anniversary dinner, she'd written in her journal. At first it was just fatigue, but then the symptoms worsened. The doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause. When I began tracking everything, I saw a pattern. These symptoms always followed meals Richard prepared just for me. There were hair analysis reports showing high levels of heavy metals, signs of prolonged exposure to toxins. She'd saved test results from meals at home and notes from 3 different specialists, all puzzled by how her illness progressed so unusually. "I can't prove anything," Evelyn wrote, heartbreak in every word. "And by the time you read this, it won't matter for me. But I had to protect you." The last page of her letter outlined a contingency plan. She'd created a second, undisclosed trust fund solely in my name. The house I believed Richard owned? The business I thought he ran? All legally mine the moment I turned 19. She had revised her will 2 weeks before she passed, working discreetly with lawyers Richard didn't even know existed. "I've ensured that what belongs to you stays yours," she promised. "The trustees will reach out on your 19th birthday automatically. But if you read this before then, you can contact them using the details in this envelope. They're ready when you are." I stayed in that quiet room at the bank for hours, trying to absorb everything I had just learned. When I finally walked out, something inside me had shifted. The fog of grief, the uncertainty and sorrow that had clouded my life for 3 years, had hardened into something sharper, clear and unshakable. I didn't confront Richard that day. I didn't scream or pack a bag and disappear. What I did was much more calculated. I turned myself into the image of their ideal daughter. Over the next 2 years, I performed flawlessly, aced every class, joined the clubs Vanessa gushed about, attended each soul-numbing event she deemed important. I wore the outfits she picked, spoke the way she liked, and kept the truth tucked behind a careful smile. But at night, when the house was quiet, I worked. I tracked everything. Every time Richard mentioned a problematic client or a complicated deal over dinner, I took note. I traced those businesses, followed the paper trail through dummy companies and fake accounts. I built spreadsheets of my own, expanding on the meticulous work Evelyn had started. My bedroom became my private war room. Behind my bookshelf, I installed a small safe and locked away every document copy, audio file, and photo I gathered. I secretly recorded conversations at the dinner table, eavesdropped on business calls they thought I couldn't understand. I took pictures of contracts Richard casually left lying on his desk, assuming his teenage daughter wouldn't recognize fraud if it slapped her in the face. 6 months after I found Evelyn's letter, I knew it was time to reach out to the people she trusted. Inside the envelope were 3 business cards. One belonged to a forensic accountant, another to a lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime, and the third was from a retired judge, Evelyn's father's closest friend. We arranged to meet at the judge's house one Saturday afternoon. I told Richard the first had debate team practice. I'd already spoken to them on the phone, but showing them the physical evidence made it real in a way words never could. The accountant shut his eyes for a moment when he saw the extent of the fraud. The lawyer muttered a curse under her breath, and the judge looked at me with deep sadness and something close to fury. "Your mother was one of the finest human beings I've ever known," he said quietly. "So, "What do you want to do, Lauren?" I had already spent months considering that exact question. I could have blown everything wide open, put Richard and Vanessa behind bars. Or I could have waited in silence, claiming my inheritance quietly when I turned 19. I could have cornered them, forced a confrontation, demanded answers they'd never willingly give. But instead, I made the decision Evelyn had hoped I would. Careful, deliberate justice. "I want to learn everything," I told them. "About the business, about finance, about law. I want to be ready to take back what's mine." The judge gave a slow nod like he'd been expecting me to say that. "Your mother said you would. She left us instructions in case you chose this path." So that's what I did. For the next 18 months, I led a double life. On the surface, I was the golden girl Vanessa loved to show off. But 3 nights a week, I disappeared into what I told them were tutoring sessions and volunteer projects, but they were so much more. They were secret, intensive lessons with my underground team. The forensic accountant taught me to read financial documents like a pro, how to sniff out cooked books and unearth buried accounts. He trained me to recognize the patterns behind money laundering and insider deals that kept the company afloat. The lawyer became my personal guide through the maze of corporate law, teaching me everything from contract clauses to the legal loopholes that would eventually let me reclaim what was mine. The judge brought me into his circle, introducing me to people in finance, banking, and regulatory agencies, professionals who had held Evelyn in high regard and were deeply disturbed by how her legacy had been twisted. At the same time, I worked quietly with Evelyn's attorneys behind the scenes. We laid the groundwork, reviewing the trust, organizing the evidence, finalizing the plan. I finished high school at 17, a year ahead of schedule. Richard and Vanessa were over the moon. Their little genius off to Yale early on a full ride. What they didn't realize was that while I'd been earning perfect grades, I'd also been studying business and finance on the side, online courses that taught me the inner workings of Richard's company and gave me insight into the accounts they assumed were buried for good. "We're so proud of you," Richard told me at a small graduation party they hosted in our backyard. Just family and a few of their business friends, no classmates, no teachers, no one who really knew the real me. "You've gone above and beyond anything we imagined," Vanessa added, draping an arm around my shoulders as the photographer they hired snapped away. "Yale early admission. The board is already talking about your future with the firm." I smiled and thanked them like the good daughter I was pretending to be, knowing full well that in less than 2 years, I'd be the one sitting at the head of that boardroom. A few weeks before I left for college, Vanessa sat me down during one of our lunches at her favorite absurdly priced cafe and dropped a bomb. "I want to adopt you legally," she said, placing her hand on my cheek in what she probably thought was a tender gesture. "You're already my daughter in every way that counts. Let's make it official before school starts." I watched her carefully, studying the tightness around her eyes and the way she looked at Richard before glancing back at me. It wasn't love in her voice, it was strategy. Adoption would give her stronger legal ties to the family business if anything ever happened to Richard. I leaned in and gave her a hug, whispering, "That would mean the world to me." She smiled, satisfied. "We should celebrate," Richard said, waving the waiter over for the check. "Maybe a weekend in the Hamptons? We could invite the Montgomerys. Their son just started at Harvard Law." "That sounds amazing," I said sweetly, while silently recalling the file I had built on the Montgomerys' failing tech company and the unexplained cash injection it had received last year through one of Richard's dummy corporations. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with my trustees. I told Richard and Vanessa I was staying at a friend's house to celebrate graduation. Instead, I headed to the judge's study where we gathered beneath shelves lined with leather-bound legal tomes. "They want me to sign adoption papers," I explained, laying out the situation. "Will that interfere with the plan?" The lawyer immediately pulled out a stack of documents and spread them across the glossy wood table. "Actually, this might work in our favor," she said. "The adoption process requires them to disclose updated financial information. We'll get fresh data on their assets. And as for your mother's trust, that's airtight. Nothing changes." "How close are we?" I asked. The accountant pushed up his glasses and scanned his notes. "We've tracked about 73% of the missing money. It passed through 4 countries and 2 accounts we've been able to trace. More than enough for an indictment." The judge looked at me gently. "And the medical evidence?" "About Evelyn's illness?" That part was still the hardest to face, the possibility that Richard hadn't just cheated, but had deliberately harmed her. The medical consultants we'd hired couldn't confirm it was murder, but the symptoms, the toxicology reports, the pattern was too suspicious to ignore. We keep that on a separate track, I said firmly. One war at a time. As I stood to leave, the judge reached for a small box wrapped in soft blue paper. Your mother left this with instructions. She said to give it to you once you were ready to move forward. Inside was a vintage Montblanc fountain pen, once owned by my grandfather. She used that pen to sign the deal on her first acquisition, the judge said. She wanted you to have it when the moment came to reclaim what's yours. That pen became a symbol for me after that night, something I kept close, like a quiet vow to myself. 2 weeks later, Mother's Day rolled around. Vanessa, as usual, went all out. It was her favorite stage, the one day a year she could play the doting mother for a crowd. She planned an over-the-top garden party for 30 of their inner circle friends. She fully intended to announce the adoption in front of everyone. While she prepped photo ops in floral centerpieces, I spent the days leading up to the event working late into the night. In my room, I carefully assembled her Mother's Day gift, documents, timelines, financial records, a visual masterpiece of their betrayal and fraud. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was by far the most thoughtful present I'd ever created for her. That morning, the weather was almost too perfect, sunny, calm, warm enough for linen dresses and chilled wine. Vanessa's carefully curated party was coming together like a wedding. Caterers arrived at dawn, followed by florists, a full planning team, and a small army of assistants who transformed our backyard into a Pinterest-worthy event space. It looked nothing like the lush, messy garden Evelyn once loved. I found Vanessa in her dressing room, standing in front of a three-way mirror, surrounded by a pile of rejected outfits. What do you think? She asked, holding up two nearly indistinguishable cream-colored dresses, one Dior, one Chanel. The Chanel, I answered calmly, watching as she instantly tossed aside the Dior, the one I'd deliberately complimented earlier. I've got something special for you, I said, handing over a beautifully wrapped box tied with a delicate silver ribbon. Oh, Lauren, you didn't have to, she said, surprise flickering across her face with the faintest trace of sincerity. We both knew I'd never given her a Mother's Day present before. I wanted to for the big announcement today, I replied. She glanced at the box and set it gently on her vanity. I'll open it later during the party. It'll feel more meaningful that way. I'd prefer if you opened it now, I said, just a little firmer. Something in my voice made her pause. She studied my expression for a moment, then slowly reached for the gift. Inside was a book, leather-bound, gold-embossed, custom-made. The title on the cover read A Daughter's Gratitude. Oh, Lauren, she breathed, clearly expecting something sentimental, a tear-jerking montage of photos and handwritten tributes. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the cover. The very first page showed a photo of Evelyn radiant and healthy before the illness took hold. Vanessa blinked, lips tightening. What is this? She asked, her voice suddenly thin. Keep reading, I said softly. It gets better. As she turned the pages, the color in her face shifted, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally panic. The book laid out the entire story Evelyn had uncovered and entrusted to me. Hotel invoices, bank records, lab reports, each item carefully annotated in my tidy handwriting. I watched as Vanessa's perfectly made-up face began to crack under pressure, foundation sliding, forehead shining. By the time she reached the embezzlement records, her upper lip glistened with sweat, and her mascara had started to smudge. This is ridiculous, she whispered, though her hand kept flipping pages. She couldn't stop herself. The final section laid everything bare. The restructured trust, the pending lawsuits, and the appointment I had scheduled for the next morning with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. You and Richard were so confident those offshore accounts couldn't be traced, I said casually, now seated on the edge of her vanity table. But banking secrecy isn't what it used to be. 21 countries have passed transparency laws in the last 5 years. I smiled. And did you know that electronic fund transfers leave digital timestamps? Those can be matched with your phone's GPS data. The blood drained from her face. You and your husband will definitely want to hear the offer I'll be extending, I added smoothly. She stood up so suddenly she knocked over her mimosa. The flute rolled off the table and shattered on the floor. You ungrateful little. Careful, I whispered, leaning in just slightly. Your guests are arriving. And I haven't decided yet whether to share what's in Chapter 3. Her gaze dropped to the open book, where a page showed screen captures of her text to Richard. sent the same week Evelyn was hospitalized. One complained that visiting hours were ruining their dinner plans. Another griped about having to play nice for appearances. "What do you want?" she hissed, straightening her dress with trembling fingers. "You're going to walk downstairs," I said, standing calmly. "You're going to host your perfect little garden party. You'll smile, laugh, and play the role you love so much. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, you and Richard will meet me at Judge Whitaker's office. I let the next part land like a stone. We'll be discussing the terms of your continued freedom." She looked around like a cornered animal, probably scanning for exits that didn't exist. "This is blackmail," she snapped. "No," I said coldly. "This is justice. With a little mercy, if you can earn it." I stepped toward the door. "You have 30 seconds to fix your face. People are watching." The party dragged on for hours, 3 agonizing hours. Vanessa smiled through it all, though her hands shook every time she lifted a glass. Her grin stayed in place like it was painted on, but the edges frayed when no one was looking. I, meanwhile, played my role to perfection, clinking glasses, toasting her guidance, watching her flinch at every carefully chosen phrase. "Lauren has been a gift," Vanessa told Mrs. Whitaker with brittle sweetness. "I couldn't love her more if she were my own. And Vanessa's taught me so much," I added, locking eyes with her. "About loyalty. About the price of choices." Mrs. Whitaker blinked between us, sensing something but unsure what exactly simmered beneath the surface. "Well," she said with an awkward chuckle, "you're clearly good for one another." At some point, Richard texted that he was running late from his golf game. That was fine. His gift was already waiting on his desk upstairs. An exact replica of Vanessa's book, with extras tailored to his personal involvement in the fraud. As the sun dipped lower, guests began to trickle out. They praised Vanessa for a beautiful event and congratulated me on Yale like they knew me. I stood beside her by the door, accepting air kisses from women drenched in expensive perfume and nerves, shaking hands with men who had once worked alongside my grandfather but could no longer recall my name. One of Richard's partners leaned in with a quiet question. "Is Vanessa all right? She seems a little tense." "Oh, she's just overwhelmed by the adoption news," I said with an easy smile. "It's a big day for her." Once the last guest left, Vanessa vanished. I found her upstairs 20 minutes later, frantically cramming clothes into a suitcase. She whirled around when she heard my voice. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leaning casually against the doorway. She stood there, clutching a tangled fistful of jewelry like it might save her. "You can't prove any of this. It's all circumstantial." The FBI disagrees," I interrupted. "So does the SEC. But hey, go ahead and run. They're already expecting it." "There's been a federal agent parked at the end of our street for 3 days," I said coolly. It was a complete bluff. The authorities hadn't been looped in, at least not yet. That was part of the leverage I was holding back, a key piece in the negotiation I was orchestrating. But Vanessa didn't know that. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the half-packed suitcase forgotten beside her. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we wait for Richard," I said. "Then we talk about your options." About an hour later, Richard walked through the front door, calling out for Vanessa like it was any ordinary evening. I met him in the foyer, holding his Mother's Day surprise in both hands. "Where's Van?" "How was the party?" he asked, loosening his tie. "She's upstairs," I replied, handing him the custom-bound book. "But I think you'll want to look at this first." I stood silently and watched the transformation unfold, one I'd already seen once before. As he flipped through pages of financial statements, photographs, and annotated evidence, his expression barely changed. Unlike Vanessa, he didn't speak. The years of legal training had taught him how to shut down under pressure. Eventually, he lifted his eyes to meet mine. His face was unreadable. "Where did you get all this?" "Evelyn left it," I said, along with detailed instructions. For a brief second, something like pain crossed his face, but he buried it almost immediately. "Lauren, whatever you think you know, is backed up in triplicate," I interrupted. "Stored across several secure locations, including medical documentation of Evelyn's health decline, evidence that raises serious questions about more than just theft." His face went pale. "You don't actually believe I poisoned her?" he asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But there's enough to justify an investigation, if I choose to go that route." He closed the book slowly, like it might break apart in his hands. What do you want? The same arrangement I offered your wife, I said evenly. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Judge Whitaker's office. We'll discuss what you need to do to stay out of prison. Later that night, after the last guest had gone and the house fell quiet, I found Vanessa sitting alone in what used to be Evelyn's garden. The space had been redesigned beyond recognition, now filled with white modern furniture and sculpted hedges. Not a single wildflower remained. She didn't look up when she spoke. Why now? Why wait? I sat beside her, smoothing my dress over my knees. Because Evelyn taught me to wait for the right moment. And I needed to understand everything before I acted. What do you want from us? It was the moment I'd imagined for years. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, power, peace. But instead, I just felt tired. Richard signs over control of the company under the original trust structure. You both resign publicly but stay on as consultants quietly. Under my supervision. I glanced at her. And the money you stole? It goes back into the trust. In return for what? She asked bitterly. I don't press charges. She laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. You're almost 18. You think you can run an entire company? I just turned 18, I said evenly. And I have a team, Evelyn's team. People who've been waiting for this moment just as long as I have. I've been preparing since I was 12. Footsteps echoed across the patio. Richard's. Heavy, slow. Vanessa's fingers clenched the arms of her chair. He'll never agree, she hissed. I stood, adjusting the necklace Evelyn had left me. He already did, I said. Check your phone. While we sat there, he'd finished reading his copy of the book. His text to Vanessa was short and simple. She knows everything. Richard stepped into the patio light, his face drawn and exhausted. You didn't have to go about it this way, he said quietly. You could have come to me. We could have talked. Like Evelyn did? I asked, turning to him. You mean when she confronted you about the affair? Or when she noticed the money missing from the trust? Remind me, how did those conversations end? He didn't answer. Instead, he tried another route. This business isn't just numbers and contracts. It's trust, relationships. You push us out, you could ruin that. Already addressed, I said. Evelyn's original team is still loyal to her memory. They've been waiting for a reason to return. Vanessa turned on him, her glare like broken glass. You said they were behind you. That they'd never leave. He lied, I told her. Just like he lied about the prenup. Her head snapped toward me. What prenup? The one with the infidelity clause. The clause that means you walk away with nothing if you divorce. She looked at Richard, her eyes wide. You never said it. I have a copy, I said. Along with plenty of evidence proving your ongoing relationship with Mark Sullivan in legal. Her face went white. You really thought those hotel stays wouldn't pop up in a forensic audit? Richard blinked, the truth landing heavy. You told me that was over, he said, his voice rising. It is, she said too fast. But her eyes betrayed her, darting anywhere but toward him. She's playing you, Vanessa snapped, her voice turning sharp. Lauren's manipulating you. Actually, I said, stepping forward, manipulation is your signature move. I met her eyes, cold, steady. I prefer being direct. 9 sharp tomorrow morning, I told them. Don't be late. And don't even think about skipping town. I've got people watching the house. It was a bluff. There were no agents, no surveillance. Not yet anyway. But Vanessa didn't need to know that. It gave me just enough leverage to keep her from bolting, at least I hoped so. I left them on the patio, their angry, hushed voices echoing behind me as I walked back inside. Upstairs in my room, I called Judge Whitaker to confirm our appointment, then emailed the full evidence package to my trustees. I included a simple instruction. If they didn't hear from me by noon the next day, forward everything to the authorities. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of their arguments. Sometimes it escalated, something slammed, something shattered. Around 3 a.m. I heard a car start, followed by the faint hum of tires rolling down the driveway. By the time the sun crept in, the house had gone quiet. I dressed with purpose. A fitted, conservative suit, one Evelyn had picked out for my first academic competition. Pearl earrings. Light makeup. Polished. Professional. I looked older than my age, and that was intentional. When I came downstairs, Richard sat alone at the kitchen island, hunched over a coffee mug, still in yesterday's clothes. Where's Vanessa? I asked, already knowing the answer. Gone, he said without looking up. took the car, grabbed her jewelry, left the phone behind. Exactly as I expected. That complicates things, I replied evenly. But it doesn't derail anything. She was never the one with the power anyway. He finally lifted his head and for the first time in a long while really looked at me. You remind me of her, he said quietly. Your mother. When she had something worth fighting for. It hit me square in the chest, part pride, part ache. We should go, I said. The judge isn't a fan of lateness. The meeting was formal and direct. Richard, noticeably drained of his usual polish, signed every page without protest. Power of attorney. Voting control. Official resignation. Judge Whittaker guided him through each line, voice flat but eyes sharp. You understand, the judge said, pausing, that all of this depends on full cooperation with the recovery team. If you withhold assets or interfere in any way, we'll activate the criminal complaints immediately. Richard nodded stiffly. And the company's public statement, the judge continued, will follow the draft we've prepared. Family succession. Preserving Evelyn's legacy. Another silent nod. No fight left. Initial here. Sign there. When the paperwork was nearly done, Judge Whittaker handed over one final document. This one prohibits you from contacting Lauren directly until she turns 19. All communication must go through our office or her trustees. Richard's head snapped up. What? That's my daughter. You can't. Sign it, I said, quiet but firm. Or I release the medical records. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen, Evelyn's Montblanc, which I had brought deliberately for this moment. He scrawled his name on the final line, then set the pen down, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of everything had finally landed. Can I at least explain? He asked, barely above a whisper. I've already read your explanations, I said. In your emails to Vanessa. In the memos rationalizing the trust transfers. In that board document where you described me as a symbolic successor with no real influence. So no, I think I understand perfectly. Judge Whittaker closed the meeting and informed Richard that a car was waiting to take him to a hotel. He'd be allowed back next week to collect his personal belongings, under supervision. As he passed me on his way out, he paused, then looked down at me one last time. Your mother would be proud, he said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a farewell. I know, I replied. 2 months later, I sat at the head of the conference table in what used to be Richard's office. The company's transition had been presented publicly as a long-term family succession plan, complete with press coverage about me being the youngest female CEO in the industry. Richard remained as a ceremonial figurehead, stripped of real authority, bound by contracts so tight he couldn't sneeze without reporting it. He kept the house, maintained his public image, stayed out of prison. In return, I gained control of the company, the trust, and every facet of his professional life reviewed quarterly by me. The trustees became my executive advisors. Trusted people. Evelyn's people. They guided me through daily operations, stabilizing everything that had quietly unraveled under Richard's watch. I deferred Yale for a year. There was too much to rebuild, and the best business education was happening right in front of me. 3 weeks after Vanessa disappeared, she resurfaced in Miami. The FBI picked her up at a bank while she was trying to access one of the flagged offshore accounts. She spent 2 nights in jail before Richard's lawyers negotiated a deal. In exchange for full cooperation, she was released under strict conditions and flown back to Connecticut. Now she lives in a company-owned condo, under monitoring, stripped of authority, working a meaningless role as a client liaison. That prenup I mentioned? Every word of it held up. Just like I knew it would. Richard eventually filed for divorce, claiming abandonment and infidelity. Vanessa walked away with only what was outlined in the separation agreement we had constructed, nothing more. At first, she resisted. She threatened to blow the lid off the company's darkest secrets, to take everything public. But my legal team was ready. We reminded her that such a move would make her the prime suspect in the eyes of the law. She backed off quickly after that. It wasn't justice. Not really. Nothing could ever make up for what was taken from Evelyn. But it was a start, a step toward the future she had wanted for me. Autonomy. Security. Accountability. The search for answers about what truly happened to Evelyn, how her health declined so rapidly, never stopped. Quietly in the background, I hired independent specialists to reanalyze preserved tissue samples. I had personal items from her vanity tested, untouched since before she got sick. I tracked down nurses, doctors, anyone who had been there in her final months. But nothing gave us the clarity we needed. Patterns emerged, red flags blinked in the data, but no clear evidence. No smoking gun. Through it all, Richard insisted he had nothing to do with her illness. Even in private strategy meetings, where he admitted everything else, he held that line. The cancer was real, he said. I never messed with her medication. Never poisoned her food. I wanted her gone, yes. I wished for it every day. But I didn't make it happen. I didn't know whether to believe him. Part of me wanted it to be true, to believe he'd crossed every line so I could pursue his downfall without hesitation. But another part clung to the hope that he hadn't. That some small piece of the father I once adored still lived behind the ruin. Meanwhile, under new leadership, the company began to thrive. We dismantled Richard's web of shell companies and shady deals. Recovered most of the money he'd hidden away. Repaired our relationships with longtime clients. I worked nearly nonstop 16-hour days, sometimes crashing on the office couch instead of going home. Home. That word started to feel foreign. The old house, with its echoes of Evelyn and the shadows of everything that happened, never felt like mine. 6 months into my leadership, I sold it. I moved into a clean, quiet apartment downtown, just blocks from the office. No ghosts there. Just space to breathe. Richard moved to, downsized to a modest place in the suburbs. No more country club. No more cocktail parties. After the company released a carefully worded statement about the leadership transition, his social standing crumbled. Everyone understood what had really happened, even if the press didn't say it outright. Last week, I visited Evelyn's grave for the first time since reading her letter. I stood in silence, wildflowers in hand, and laid them gently against the stone. I did what you asked, I whispered. The company's secure. Your name is safe. I just wish you could see it. As I turned to walk away, something caught my eye, a figure standing a few yards away, partially hidden among the trees. Vanessa. She held a small bouquet of flowers. She stood still. When our eyes met, she didn't speak. Just gave a slight nod, then turned and walked away. Some lessons take years to sink in. And some gifts, some messages, keep echoing long after they're given. Every year on Mother's Day, I send Vanessa the same thing. One photo. Evelyn smiling in her garden, sunlight on her face. Tucked beneath the image, a handwritten note. Thinking of you today. She never replies. But she doesn't need to. She understands. It's the only conversation we have left. And it says everything that still needs to be said.